What's up everyone, welcome to HiFi Turtle. If you're like me, you've probably been to a high-end audio trade show. And if you've been to one of those shows, you know there are a lot of rooms that advertise the fact that they are cost no object. That means they have the absolute best of the best, the highest of high-end. It's cost no object. Like any other audio reviewer, I get asked a lot, what is the best? Well, the best varies and it depends on your taste, what you're looking for, what your setup is like. But in those cost no object rooms, there's one thing that typically does not change, in my observation at least, and that is the fact that these cost no object rooms use dCS DACs. So a couple weeks ago, I got to take home the dCS BARTOK, which is their entry-level DAC at $16,000, jumping to $18,500 if you want the optional headphone amp. So is it worth the hype? Is the hype warranted? Well, I hyped this video up by making basically a movie trailer for it, and I highly recommend that you go watch that before we continue any further with this review, because I thought it was pretty good. So let's talk cost no object with the dCS BARTOK. Stay tuned. The first thing that you're going to notice about the Bartok is it is an absolute unit. It is over 36 pounds for this DAC. Looking inside, it is filled to the brim, including a toroidal transformer, but what I imagine adds a lot to this weight is just the fact that the chassis itself is so thick. I compared this to my Hagel H20 power amp because one of the things that Hagel particularly brags about when it comes to this amp is the fact that there's over 4 pounds of aluminum that comprises the front plate itself. But build quality, the Hagel versus the dCS is built like a tank. I feel like this thing could honestly stop a bullet. And while I do think the Hagel is still well constructed, it honestly makes the Hagel chassis look and feel incredibly cheap. With speakers and amps and other components, I'll typically look for certain areas of the build or certain ways that they make the component that justify the cost. When it comes to the world of extremely high-end DACs, that component is the FPGA. An FPGA is a field programmable gate array. It's essentially a computer processor, but allows the end user or company to upload their own firmware and microcode to allow the FPGA to basically do what they want. And the great thing about an FPGA is down the road, if you make improvements to that code or have updates to that firmware, you can update the FPGA to do more things that you've now coded for it. Unlike off-the-shelf DACs like the AKM 4490 or the ES 9028 Pro, where the circuits of the DACs that use those chips have to be built around the DAC chip. Instead, manufacturers that use FPGAs can build in tandem the FPGA around the circuit, or vice versa, the circuit around the FPGA. So with the proprietary code that dCS uses in their FPGA array, they comprise what is called the ring DAC. I'm not going to get too in the weeds on the details of the ring DAC because I think it's more helpful to actually read the direct notes from dCS. So I'm going to link below to the HiFi article about the ring DAC, what it does, why it's different than any other DAC on the market. With this DAC, you get several filters, and each of those filters is proprietary to the kind of signal that you are sending to the DAC. So the filters for PCM, DSD, MQA are independently different from each other. And yes, this does support double DSD as well as MQA. In fact, you also have the selection to do DXD or DSD upsampling. For the majority of the time that I had the Bartok, I listened in DXD, which is PCM format. I also primarily listened to filter 1 because I felt it was the cleanest, but I also felt that filter 3 and 4 were warmer than filter 1. So if you prefer a warmer tone, I would definitely give those a try. But if you get a chance to try this thing out, go through all the filters, find what works best for you. Filter 1 was the best for me, but your results may vary. So going into listening, I really didn't know what to expect from this DAC. Currently, I have the Benchmark DAC 3L, which is considered a state-of-the-art DAC. If you look at the various measurement tests of the Benchmark online, it's hard to imagine any component measuring audibly better than what the Benchmark measures at. And I've owned budget well-measuring DACs before, like the Topping D50. So based on measurements that I've seen online, I almost kind of expected the DCS to not live up to the hype because, well, the benchmark does objectively measure better than the DCS when you put the graphs side by side. And not to say that the Bartok is a poorly measuring unit, it's not at all. If anything, it is on that same state-of-the-art level. Any measurable jitter or linearity problems or signal-to-noise ratio is well beyond the threshold of human hearing. All right, so is it worth the hype? Oh man, I was in so much trouble when I turned this thing on and was listening. I was blown away immediately. I was sitting there like, I can't believe what I'm hearing right now. And this unit was loaned to me by Quintessence Audio. So when I brought this unit back and gave it to John, I told him, it really hurts to give this back. It really hurts to give this back. Because I did A/B these. So I went back to the benchmark to listen for a little bit after listening to the Bartok. And it was hard to listen to that. The difference was astounding. Every sense of ours influences the other. For example, if you had a food dish that smelled incredible, but if you plugged your nose, it actually only tasted just okay, you will think it tastes better because of how incredibly good it smells. Same thing visually. If you have a delicious meal, but it looks a mess, it won't taste as good. That's why Gordon Ramsay's always yelling at people to white the plates and make sure that it looks good, because that does play a key factor in how we perceive things. So where am I going with this? With the Bartok, I felt the soundstage. This was the biggest difference for me. The soundstage was so expansive, so wide, so deep that my room grew in size. My ears were deceiving my eyes in the fact that everything sounded so wide. My eyes, I felt like I could see the room expanding around me. I'm a big fan of Thomas in stereo, and one of the examples that Thomas did one time was he had a set of books, and he said, well, when I was listening to the speaker, it's like the musicians are like these books. I can tell where they are, but they sound flat. And then he put a bunch of stuffed animals down, and he was like, with this speaker, I felt like the musicians were like these stuffed animals. They had a 3D-ness to them. I never really understood what Thomas was saying with that until I listened to this, because all of a sudden, everything just had so much more depth. It was like, oh yeah, this is that stuffed animal sound that Thomas was talking about. And not only that, not only was the sound more 3D in the same way, where in Thomas's example, he had gone from books to stuffed animals, it was more like the stuffed animals had parsed themselves out all over the room. And like Thomas, I have a lot of stuffed animals in my house. They're not mine, but I hope you're enjoying this analogy and this visual example. So in my last review, which was the Sim Audio 700i, I was talking about treble detail and how much more detailed the treble was on the 700i versus my Hagel. That same level of treble detail came through with the Bartok. And not only that, but it was also with the expanded soundstage, so it was even better. It was even better than that, if you can believe it. It was better than that. Bass detail, I don't think I could quite articulate to better. And I'm wondering if that's because just bass itself is pretty non-directional. So maybe that's why I felt like it wasn't a huge jump. Mid-range was ridiculous because I've always felt like, even with the cantas and now with the sopras, I've always felt that singer in the room like realism to music. When I switched back to the benchmark, I felt like I lost that realism entirely because it was so much more real on the Bartok. It was so much more lifelike. It was mind-blowing how good a singer can sound, how much presence they can have in a room. I kept wanting to tell myself it was all in my head. It was all in my head. It was all in my head. But it just wasn't. I felt like at times the soundstage, and again, I'm going to go back to the soundstage, that there was sound crawling up my wall, that I was enveloped in the music. It wasn't forward. The music wasn't more forward, but I was enveloped in the music, where I'm typically used to a soundstage like I'm a concert goer, I'm sitting back here, the stage is up there, that's where the music is living. Now let me say one disclaimer. I have almost no reference between the Benchmark and the Bartok. There is a $14,000 gap between those two. That's a lot of ground. So with maybe a $8,000 or $10,000 DAC, could I say the difference would be less? Maybe. That might be the case. But I have seen people that have those $8,000 or $10,000 DACs go to a Bartok or go all the way up to a Rossini. I do have a couple DACs in mind that fall into that category that I do want to review, and we'll get there when we do, but for now, I'm just gonna bask in the glory of the Bartok because it was so awesome. Let me talk about some things that I honestly didn't care for with the Bartok, so I don't seem too overly enthused or too in love that I can't see the red flags. The biggest thing for me is this thing does not come with a remote. There is a phone app that you can use, the dCS Mosaic. I did not use it because you need to have a network connection to the DAC in order to use it, and I just don't have an Ethernet run that will go to this room right now. And the dCS remote is not included. It is an extra $675, which breaks my heart because if you're paying $16,000 for a DAC, I kind of want you to include the remote and not milk me for another $600 and change. But you can use the free phone app that has streaming capabilities as well. So it's a little bit of a toss-up, and for 50 bucks, I could run a Ethernet cord long enough to reach this room. The other thing is the display and the front buttons I felt were really lacking for a device of this price. The front display does have some information on it, but if I was using the Mosaic app, everything that I wanted to see would be on that. So I probably honestly just turned the display off, which is an option. But the display is this LCD screen, which is just kind of cheap looking. I don't know if it's like this for a remodel or just because this one was a demo unit, but there seemed to be a lot of light bleed around the corners on the screen. And again, for this price, I honestly would have liked to see an OLED display or something just better looking than this. And there's the buttons themselves that felt a little cheap as well. I don't honestly know what would be the solution here to have like a really great feeling button, but I just felt they felt kind of like tic-tacky, and for the price. But these are really minor complaints, and I'm trying to be as nitpicky as possible, honestly. So final thoughts. $16,000 for a DAC. Is it worth it? Is the hype justified? Should you go buy one right now? Well, I can't believe I did this, but I put my name on the list for one. Now, granted, it is the used list, so I figured I'd put my name on it. If one comes up, I'll make the decision when that happens. But I want to be on that list because I guarantee you it's an ever-growing list. So if you're a staunch objectivist or you just want to know what is the deal with high-end digital audio, you need to try a Bartok. If you're still someone who has doubts about how good digital audio can sound, you need to try a Bartok. Did the Bartok honestly ruin music for me and I will never enjoy anything again until I get my hands on one? No, I don't think it's that extreme, but it is just so damn good. You need to try one. You need to try one. If you have a dCS dealer, you need to try one. If you can get your hands on one and just try it on your system, if you can go find someone at the yacht club that has one, go do it because it's so good, it's so good, it's so good. So that's gonna do it for me. I really enjoyed my time with the Bartok, if you couldn't tell already. If you like this video, make sure you hit that thumbs up, make sure you subscribe to the channel, check the links below in the description for other ways to help support the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.